Greetings and thank you for tuning into this video where I'm going to debunk, destroy, obliterate the claim. There's a lot of people who claim that the moon landing was was faked. That they claim that Neil Armstrong, among I think there were around a dozen individuals who walked on the moon. People say that Neil Armstrong never set foot on the moon. And you're watching Act One, a Canadian take on news events. I'm Gordy Canuck. My real name is Gordon Causey. And uh, this is probably going to be a long video. I don't have it fully scripted out. I've just written out bullet points, as it were. Just a page full of bullet points that I'm going to be reading off. So I might suggest, if you're one who likes to buzz through content, to put this on 1.5 or double speed. I'm not a particularly fast talker. So if you put it at 1.5 or 2, I think you should be able to still get the message I'm trying to convey. Um, Now, some will ask right off the bat, okay, this guy is going to debunk all the claims. There's a lot of people who believe the moon landing was fake, that it was a Stanley Kubrick production. And so the first question a lot are going to be asked is they're going to ask is what possible new information could this guy on YouTube have? Uh, that's going to silence all these skeptics and all these conspiracy theorists. Well, first off, I do know that no matter what, some will never be convinced. There are individuals who believe that going to the moon, even in today's world, that it is an impossibility. They'll cite things like the Van Allen radiation belts and such and say, you know, we couldn't even go today if we wanted, and it wouldn't matter if they were grabbed, thrown onto a spaceship or a rocket, sent up with a full panoramic view, big window, and landed on the moon, were put into a spacesuit and walked on it themselves and saw our Earth from from the moon's surface, they still would claim it never happened. They would claim it was a hallucination. They will claim it was, staged still. So I do know that not everyone is going to be convinced by what I'm going to share. But um, what brought this on, what got me to finally come clean or come out with this information was a conversation or a Twitter exchange now called X, Elon Musk's platform. Uh, and there were posts up about Richard Nixon from the White House. He was president when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, and he had a phone patch conversation. And many will have seen this claim before. How could he have picked up a phone and called the moon? Come on. That's ridiculous. And that one just, if you're going to try and debunk the moon landing, don't use that example because you look like an idiot. Phone patch technology, the ability to patch in radio communications onto a landline telephone, that technology has been around since World War II. I used to do it all the time. I'm a military veteran. I was a veteran. I'm a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces. I was in the communications branch. Some will know it as signals. Uh, I'm wearing a T-shirt that was a regimental T-shirt when I was with the 5th Mechanized Brigade Group, HQ and SIGs. And some will know SIGENT, and things like that. I'm not going to say anything more on that. Uh, but, and pardon me while I just catch up on my notes. Uh, what would a Canadian know? A lot of people will say, "Oh, okay, you were in the army and you were in signals, communications, and SIGINT and all that." But what do Canadians know? Canadians weren't even involved in the space program. And I'll say fair enough, but I'll ask, have you ever heard of a gentleman by the name of Paul Hellyer? Paul Hellyer, during that period, during the time of the Apollo missions, was the Canadian Minister of National Defense. This was back during the administration of Lester B. Pearson, former Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson, who was the Prime Minister before Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And Paulie only died, I think it was 2021, 2020. It was only 4 or 5 years ago that Paulie passed away. And many will know the name Paul Hellyer because he made something of a name for himself laterally after he was out of government when he started to talk about what is typically framed as extraterrestrials. However, I think a better description would be interdimensional beings. But that's a completely side point. Maybe I'll do a video on that. And to be clear, I'm not confirming that I knew or ever met Paul Hellyer. I'm not denying or confirming anything here with respect to Mr. The Right Honorable former Minister of National Defense, Paul Hellyer, Paulie. Uh, but that, so take this for what it is worth. But where I get to the crux of the matter, it concerns an individual that many of you will never have even heard of. In fact, I would bet that probably 98, 99% of people watching this video will have never heard of the name Manuel Klein, or better known as Manny Klein. Manuel, Spanish name, Manny Klein. Born 1916 in the United States of America, um, studied under Einstein, Albert Einstein, in the 1940s and 1950s after Einstein emigrated to the United States in the wake of World War, during World War II or just before. I forget exactly when Einstein came over to the US. I think it was just in the 1930s during the Nazi era when Einstein came over and Manuel or Manny Klein studied under him in the late 40s and again the early 50s, and he's a controversial figure. I mean, look at the name, Manuel Manny. That's a Hispanic name. His mother was Hispanic, of Spanish origin, and his father, Klein, Jewish. And the man was brilliant. He was a genius. I don't know if he was as smart as Einstein, but he studied under him. And as a matter of fact, he was so well known in scientific circles. He was an expert on cosmology, on lunology, on the moon, and things of that nature. This is not my background. I'm not a scientific guy. I have no degrees in any of the sciences. I have no letters after my name with respect to the sciences. But anyway, it is reported that he was under consideration for a Nobel Prize in some field of science. However, the Nobel Committee that determines who wins the Nobel Prize, they're very concerned about who they award their prize to. They don't want to give, it's very prestigious, there's a lot of money attached, and the Nobel Committee does not like to be embarrassed. And Manny Klein represented something of a problem for them because despite his brilliance, he had a bad reputation. He was known as a womanizer. Uh, a girl in every port of call, as they would say in the Navy. Uh, and as a matter of fact, when they were working on the Manhattan Project, the development of the atomic bomb in the later stages of World War II, it was his womanizing that kept him off that project. Despite his brilliance, in term when you're vetting individuals to work on something that has national security implications, you have to be very concerned about the potential for someone to be compromised, for someone to, you know, honeypot type scheme. And a guy who has a reputation and a history of being a womanizer, you would think he would represent a threat. So he was not allowed on the Manhattan Project. However, he was able to work at NASA later during the space program, but he was a background character. He was not one of the prominent names. They're not going to be making any movies about Manny Klein. Uh, he was in the background. I kind of tend to think of him as being somewhat like Sidney Carton, if you know the book A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Charles Sidney Carton was in the background at the law firm, and he was a drunk, and he was a very flawed character, but a brilliant mind. And I tend to think of Manny Klein in that fashion. So he's kind of been forgotten by history. But the key point and the central point to all this is that he was a very close and personal friend of Neil Armstrong. And as a matter of fact, most of what we know, or most of the information that's available on Manny Klein, for those who have access, it's from background checks and security briefings with Neil Armstrong. And Neil Armstrong was a very close personal friend. And I genuinely think it was because of Neil Armstrong that Manny Klein was able to work in the background at NASA during the Apollo space program. And the Neil Armstrong, Manny Klein, golfing buddies, drinking buddies, friends. I believe that Neil Armstrong somewhat looked up to to Manny Klein. He regarded him as something of maybe an uncle type figure. I don't want to say father figure. He wasn't that much older than Armstrong, but maybe a mentor type figure. I imagine Neil Armstrong was obviously, to become an astronaut, you have to be incredibly intelligent, and so he gravitated to him and was a big advocate, apparently, for him. And this information that we have on Manny Klein, the principal thing is the reason why was Manny Klein such a womanizer? Neil Armstrong um, wanted to know the reason why, because it had held him back. He could have maybe won a Nobel Prize. He could have been on the Manhattan Project if he hadn't been such a womanizer. And what we found out is that Manny Klein told Neil Armstrong that the reason he was a womanizer was because his wife was, I think the term is, frigid. She was not very forthcoming in the bedroom. Apparently, many, and this happens to a lot of men as you get older. You want to get a little adventurous, want to spice things up. And Mrs. Klein, who apparently was also Jewish, was very cold, frigid. And, Manny wanted to do different things and she wouldn't have anything of it. Apparently, he wanted her to perform oral sex on him and she refused. And, nowadays we say, oh, when pigs fly, when pigs fly and for whatever. Yeah, I'll do that when pigs fly. But back in the 30s and 40s, before the space program came along, a common one that people would often say is, yeah, I'll do that when a man walks on the moon. And apparently that was her remark when Manny Klein asked for her to perform oral sex on him. I'll do it when a man walks on the moon. But that's all, nowadays we would say when pigs fly. But at any rate, so Neil Armstrong, the moon landing took place. And as I say, that phone conversation that happened, I used to do this. Phone patching is not high tech. All you're doing is you're taking a radio communication and connecting it, you're patching it on to a phone call. I used to do this for pilots when I worked at a radar station. We'd have guys calling in, pilots on the radio, and saying, "Here's my home phone number. Can you call my wife?" And I would always, if it was me doing it, I would say, "Okay, but just remember, I know you know this, but remember, we will be monitoring. It's on speaker. Over." Yeah, I'm aware. Over. And then I would do the phone patch call and then flick the switch. And now the wife is talking on the phone and the pilot's talking on his radio headset. This is not complicated. The only thing is, uh, the sound quality on phone patches, even the ones I did, it's not high quality. When you're doing a radio transmission from a plane, 1,000 whatever, 1,500 feet in the air, there's a lot of interference, and things are better now than they were in 1969 when the moon landing took place. But it's still not the highest quality. And there is something, I'm coming to the end. There's something that happens during, it's called sometimes predictive programming, um, where you hear something, but you're not sure what you heard. And then someone gives you the words, and then you go, "Oh, now I hear it. Now I hear it." Many will be familiar with back masking, where you'd play a record backwards. The one I'm most familiar with is from Queen and their song "Another One Bites the Dust." And if you played it backwards, it sounds all garbled, but then someone will tell you, if you listen carefully, they're saying it's fun to smoke marijuana. It's fun to smoke marijuana. Then you do it again. And now that you've been told what to listen for, oh, I hear it. I hear it. There's a British comedian, I think his name is Peter McKay, might not have the name right, where he talks about how he misunderstood song lyrics. How there's a song, "I'm begging you for mercy." And he said, "For years, I thought she was saying bird seed. I thought she was begging me for bird seed." And now that he's planted that, programmed that into your head, when he plays the music, and then you hear, "I'm begging you for bird seed." And you go, wow. And you can probably see it, many will have already. And that's what happened with Neil Armstrong when he stepped off the lunar lander. And we've all been told that what he said was, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And we've been told, so that's what we hear. But that is not what Neil Armstrong said. What Neil Armstrong actually said when he stepped off the lunar lander was, that's one small step for man, one giant leap for Manny Klein." He was walking on the moon. Manny was finally going to get what he wanted from his wife. I hope you enjoyed my little video. I may do another on this topic. I'm here to tell you right now that I am a skeptic when it comes to the moon landing, and I have reasons why. But I appreciate you making it to this point. A long way to go, almost 20 minutes for a bad pun. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for Manny Klein. I'll do that when a man walks on the moon. Well, honey, I don't know. Manny Klein never existed. I made it all up. An old joke that I just played with. But at any rate, if you like the content, like, share, subscribe, comment. Did I get you? Did you know right off the bat? Had you already heard the joke? Let me know. And subscribe to the channel. I talk about a lot of things on here. And I probably will do a video about the reasons for my skepticism with respect to the moon landing. And it might not be, it might be a little different from what you're used to. Because the biggest question is, why? Why even, why would you go to all the trouble to do all that just to fake, to fool people? What's the motivation? And I have an opinion as to what the motivation would be. And maybe I'll do a video on it, probably. At any rate, thank you for watching. And I do hope to see you back, and I do hope to read some comments. We'll talk to you later. Bye now.